Stop immediately. This property is under WA jurisdiction. Her voice cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp enough that the Martins next door stopped unloading groceries to stare. I stood at the edge of my driveway, measuring tape in hand, facing down a woman who'd just climbed out of a white Lexus like she owned the entire street. Behind her, two men in polo shirts, emblazoned with Pinewood Hills HOA enforcement, were unrolling a surveyor's wheel across my front lawn, without permission, without warning, without so much as a hello. "Mr. Davis," she called out, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. "This property line survey violates HOA, Covenant Section 7.4.2. You need to cease all activities immediately. I've lived in this house for 3 weeks. I've read the HOA covenants cover to cover. There is no Section 7.4.2. There is no Section 7.4.2, I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building in my chest. She took a step closer, that professional smile never wavering. "Mr. Davis, the board voted last month to implement new boundary verification protocols. It's all perfectly legal. Show me the vote. It's in the minutes." "Show me the minutes." Her smile flickered. "Just for a second. Mr. Davis, you're being difficult. If you continue to obstruct HOA business, we'll have no choice but to levy fines." "Fines?" I looked past her at those two men, now driving stakes into my lawn. "This is my property. My father left it to me. I have the deed." "That deed has a problem," she said smoothly. "A significant legal problem. I suggest you contact an attorney before proceeding further." "Who the hell are you?" "Victoria Hayes," she said, extending a business card I didn't take. "President of the Pinewood Hills Homeowners Association. We've filed a quiet title action to reclaim this property on behalf of the community. You'll be served formally within the week." Then she turned and walked back to her Lexus, heels clicking on my driveway like gunshots. I stood there holding my measuring tape, watching her drive away, while two strangers continued surveying my property like I didn't exist. What I didn't know then was that my father hadn't died of natural causes 5 years ago, that beneath this suburban cul-de-sac sat something worth millions, and that Victoria Hayes would do anything, absolutely anything, to take it from me. Before I tell you how this morning confrontation spiraled into corporate fraud, a conspiracy that reached the governor's office, and a woman being led away in handcuffs in front of the entire neighborhood, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because this story proves that sometimes the most dangerous criminals wear business suits and carry clipboards. 3 weeks earlier, I'd driven into Pinewood Hills for the first time in 5 years. May 2025. Phoenix suburbs. The kind of planned community where every house looks tastefully different but somehow exactly the same. Adobe-style architecture, terracotta roofs, xeriscaped yards with decorative gravel and drought-resistant plants. My father, James Davis, had bought this house in 2003 when the development was brand new. Back when people still thought Phoenix real estate was a sure bet, he'd lived here alone after my mother passed, keeping to himself, maintaining the property, paying his HOA dues without complaint. Then, 5 years ago, he died. Heart attack, the medical examiner said. Found in his study, papers scattered around him like he'd been working on something important. I'd flown in from Seattle for the funeral, handled the estate paperwork, and left. Couldn't stomach staying in that empty house. Couldn't deal with the memories. But now I was 38, burned out from 12 years as an environmental consultant for tech companies, and the inheritance felt like the only solid thing left in my life. A house paid off. In a decent neighborhood, far from the Seattle rain that had started to feel like it was drowning me. So I'd packed my life into a U-Haul and driven south. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Single-story ranch style, 2,400 square feet, tile floors, and vaulted ceilings. My father's furniture still in place, sparse and functional. His study exactly as it had been, files and books organized with military precision. He'd been a civil engineer, worked for the county for 30 years, designed roads, water systems, infrastructure, the kind of man who measured everything twice and kept meticulous records. I'd spent the first 2 weeks cleaning, organizing, trying to make the space feel like mine instead of his. Then I decided to check the property boundaries. My father had mentioned something in one of our last phone calls 2 months before he died. Said the HOA had been asking questions about property lines, about old surveys, about whether he'd be interested in selling. He'd sounded worried. Said something didn't feel right. I'd thought he was being paranoid. Old man fears, loneliness, making him suspicious. Now, I wasn't sure. So that morning, I'd pulled out the property survey from the county assessor's office and started measuring. Just to confirm. Just to know what was mine. That's when Victoria Hayes showed up with her enforcement team and her clipboard and her complete certainty that she had the right to tell me what to do on my own property. After they left, I went inside and called the attorney who'd handled my father's estate, Gerald Briggs, 72 years old, practiced law in Arizona for 45 years, knew every loophole and every trick. He answered on the third ring. "Gerald," I said, "it's Ryan Davis, Jim's son. I need to talk to you about the house." There was a pause, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said finally. "How soon can you get to my office? I'm coming now." His office was in Old Town Scottsdale, above an art gallery, the kind of place where the stairs creaked and the air conditioning never quite worked. I'd been there once before, 5 years ago, to sign the probate papers. Gerald was waiting when I arrived, looking older than I remembered. White hair, thin, shoulders stooped, but his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He gestured me into his office and closed the door. "Your father called me 3 times in the month before he died," Gerald said without preamble. He was worried. Said the HOA was pressuring him to sell. Said they were claiming there was a problem with his property deed. "What kind of problem?" Gerald pulled a file from his desk drawer. Thick. Dog-eared. My father's name on the tab. "In 2019, a company called Desert Vista Development made an offer on your father's house. 3 times market value, cash deal, close in 30 days. Your father turned them down flat. Why? He loved that house. And he suspected something was wrong. 2 weeks after he declined, the HOA started sending violation notices. His mailbox was the wrong color. His landscaping didn't comply with covenant standards. His garage door needed repainting. All minor things. All fixable. But they kept coming." Gerald opened the file and pulled out a stack of papers. Violation notices, dozens of them, each signed by Victoria Hayes. Then came this. He slid a legal document across the desk. Quiet title action. Filed in 2020. HOA claimed your father's property line was in error, that his house encroached on common area land by 15 feet. The court dismissed it for lack of evidence. But here's the thing. He tapped the document. The HOA's lawyer was the same firm that represents Desert Vista Development. I sat back, pieces starting to click together. "What's under that property?" I asked. "Why do they want it so badly?" Gerald's expression darkened. "I don't know, but your father thought he'd figured it out. He hired a private investigator, started documenting everything. Every HOA meeting, every violation notice, every communication. Then he died. And the medical examiner ruled it natural causes? Just like that?" Gerald nodded slowly. "Just like that. No autopsy, no toxicology screen. Your father was 62, had a clean bill of health 3 months earlier, and they ruled it a heart attack based on his age. I thought about my father, alone in that study, papers scattered around him. Where's the investigator's report?" I asked. "That's the problem." Gerald leaned forward. "Your father told me he'd hidden it. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got the house and found the truth. He said it was in the house somewhere, but I never found it." I drove back to Pinewood Hills with my mind racing. The house felt different now, not empty, occupied by secrets. I started in my father's study. Went through every file, every drawer, every book. Found tax returns, utility bills, maintenance records, everything organized, everything labeled. But no investigator's report. I moved to the bedroom, the closet, under the bed. Nothing. Kitchen cabinets, garage shelves, the attic access that led to a cramped space filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. Nothing. I was standing in the living room, frustrated and tired, when I noticed it. The fireplace. Gas. Never used. My father had never liked gas fireplaces, said they didn't feel real. But the stone surround had a loose brick. Bottom right corner. I knelt down and pulled. The brick came away easily. Behind it, a hollow space. Inside, a waterproof envelope sealed with duct tape. I carried it to the dining room table and opened it carefully. Inside, 3 items. First, a private investigator's report dated 6 months before my father's death. 40 pages. Detailed. Thorough. The investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, had traced Desert Vista development back through multiple shell companies. The trail ended at a massive real estate conglomerate called Apex Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. Apex Holdings specialized in one thing: buying up residential properties sitting on commercially valuable land, then redeveloping them at huge profit. According to Chen's research, Pinewood Hills had been built on top of former agricultural land that happened to sit on a rare geological formation. An underground aquifer, massive, one of the largest in Arizona. Water rights. In Arizona, in a drought, water rights were worth more than gold, and my father's property, due to an old county survey error, technically owned water rights to that aquifer. Rights that had been improperly transferred when the land was developed in 2003. If someone could get my father's property, they could claim those water rights, then leverage them to develop the entire area, turning suburban homes into high-density commercial real estate, worth hundreds of millions. The second item was a handwritten letter from my father. Ryan, it read, "If you're reading this, they've either forced me out or worse. The HOA is corrupt. Victoria Hayes is on Apex Holdings' payroll. She's been manipulating covenant violations, filing false legal claims, trying to pressure me into selling or defaulting on HOA dues so they can foreclose. I have proof. This report. But I also have insurance. There's a confidential agreement from 2003 signed when this development was built. The county admitted the water rights error and agreed to let me keep them if I never disclosed them publicly. That agreement is filed with the county clerk, sealed. Get it, use it, fight back. The property is yours. Don't let them steal it, Dad." The third item was a business card. Sarah Chen, private investigator, with a phone number and an email address. I pulled out my phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Sarah Chen. "Miss Chen," I said. "My name is Ryan Davis. My father was James Davis. You did an investigation for him 5 years ago." There was a pause. I remember. "Is he okay?" "He died. 5 years ago. Heart attack." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I liked your father. He was thorough, careful. Did you know about the water rights?" "I discovered them." She paused. "Mr. Davis, your father was being watched in the weeks before he died. I documented 3 different surveillance teams, professional, corporate. I warned him, but he insisted on staying in the house. Do you think he was killed? I think a healthy man doesn't die suddenly when he's sitting on evidence that could destroy a multi-million-dollar real estate scheme. Can you help me?" "I can. But you need to understand what you're up against. Apex Holdings has resources. They have lawyers, investigators, politicians on their payroll. If you're going to fight them, you need to be prepared." "I'm prepared," I said. The next morning, I drove to the Maricopa County Clerk's office, found the sealed file from 2003. The confidential agreement between James Davis and the county engineer's office. Just like my father had said, the county acknowledged that a surveying error had resulted in improper water rights transfer. In exchange for my father's silence, they agreed to let him keep the rights in perpetuity. Signed by a deputy county engineer named Thomas Redding. Stamped confidential in red ink. I made 3 copies. Kept 1. Mailed 1 to Gerald. Gave 1 to Sarah Chen. Then I went home and waited. The HOA violation notice arrived 2 days later. Immediate violation notice. Property. 847 Desert Willow Drive. Unauthorized Property Survey. Section 7.4.2. Fine, $500, increasing to $100 day if not remedied within 48 hours. Attached, photos of me with my measuring tape, taken from across the street. I called Gerald. They're escalating, he said. This is intimidation. Don't pay the fine. We'll fight it. That night, someone broke into my house. I wasn't home. I'd gone to meet Sarah Chen at a coffee shop in Tempe to go over the investigation. When I came back around 10 p.m., the front door was ajar. I called the police and waited outside. The damage was methodical. Every drawer opened, every closet searched, cushions sliced, mattress cut open. But they hadn't found what they were looking for. The envelope was still in my truck, under the seat. The police took a report. Said it was probably a burglary. Nothing stolen, though, which they admitted was strange. After they left, I sat in the living room with all the lights on and called Sarah Chen. They're looking for the report, I said. Then they know you have it. She was quiet for a moment. Ryan, you need to go public. Fast. Before they can make you disappear like they made your father disappear. How? The HOA has a board meeting next week. Public comment period. Get up there and put everything on record. Force them to respond publicly. And if they come after me, then we make sure everything's documented. Every threat, every violation, every piece of evidence. We build a case so airtight that even Apex Holdings can't bury it. The HOA board meeting was held in the Pinewood Hills Community Center, a beige stucco building that looked like every other building in the development. I arrived 15 minutes early. The room was already filling up. Residents who'd come for the usual agenda items, landscaping budgets, pool maintenance schedules, architectural review requests, and in the front row, Victoria Hayes. I got my first real look at her as she stood to organize papers at the head table. She was tall, probably 5 to 9 without the heels, mid-40s, dressed like she'd stepped out of a boardroom instead of a suburban HOA meeting. The crimson red blazer was impossible to miss, perfectly tailored, expensive looking, draped over her shoulders in a way that seemed effortlessly casual, but had probably taken an hour to arrange. Underneath, a black silk blouse with a deep V-neck that seemed calculated to distract, professional but suggestive in a way that kept you slightly off balance. The matching pencil skirt, also that bold crimson red, had a subtle slit that moved with her stride. And the shoes, glossy red heels that clicked against the tile floor like a countdown timer, matched both the blazer and her lips exactly. Her auburn hair was styled in perfect waves, shoulder length, catching the overhead lights. And those lips, glossy red, the same shade as everything else, were pressed into a thin line of controlled authority as she reviewed her notes. She looked like power itself had learned to dress for success. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Just gave me that same professional smile, the one that said she knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was planning. The meeting started at 7 p.m. sharp. Victoria ran it with ruthless efficiency. Budget reports. Maintenance updates. A proposal to increase landscaping frequency. Then, public comment period. 3 minutes per resident. I stood up. The room went quiet. I walked to the podium, a folder tucked under my arm. Victoria's smile tightened, just slightly. State your name and address, she said. Ryan Davis, 847 Desert Willow Drive. Proceed. I opened the folder. My father, James Davis, lived in this community for 17 years. He paid his HOA dues on time, he maintained his property, he followed every rule. He died 5 years ago in his study, surrounded by evidence of HOA corruption. A murmur went through the room. Victoria's expression didn't change. Mr. Davis? This is a public comment period, not a platform for conspiracy theories. I held up the private investigator's report. This is a report documenting systematic harassment of my father by this HOA, dozens of fraudulent violation notices, false legal claims, surveillance, all designed to pressure him into selling his property to a company called Desert Vista Development. And here's why. I pulled out the county agreement. My father's property sits on water rights worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Rights that this HOA, working with Apex Holdings, has been trying to steal through fraudulent quiet title actions. The room erupted. People turning to each other, voices rising. Victoria stood up, her face flushing. "Mr. Davis, you are out of order. These accusations are defamatory, and I'm not finished." I held up a bank statement Sarah Chin had obtained through a subpoena she'd filed in an unrelated case. This shows wire transfers from Apex Holdings to an account controlled by Victoria Hayes. $150,000 over the past 3 years. Payment for what, exactly? For running this HOA like a criminal enterprise? Victoria's carefully controlled expression cracked. The meeting descended into chaos. The fallout came fast. The next morning, the Arizona Republic ran a front-page story, HOA president accused of corruption in water rights scheme. By noon, the state attorney general's office had opened an investigation. By 2 p.m., Victoria Hayes had retained a criminal defense attorney. By 5 p.m., 3 other Pinewood Hills residents had come forward with their own stories of harassment and fraudulent violations. Sarah Chen called me that evening. "You did it," she said. "You forced it into the light. Now we need to keep pushing." She'd found more evidence. Email chains between Victoria and executives at Apex Holdings discussing the Davis problem and strategies for acquisition. Surveillance logs showing systematic monitoring of my father's property in the months before his death. And, most damning, the medical examiner who'd signed off on my father's death certificate had received a $25,000 consulting fee from a shell company linked to Apex Holdings 2 weeks after my father died. Gerald filed 3 lawsuits simultaneously. Quiet title action to confirm my ownership. Wrongful death claim against Apex Holdings and Victoria Hayes. RICO suit, alleging criminal conspiracy. The discovery process was brutal. Apex Holdings' attorneys tried to bury us in motions, tried to seal evidence, tried to claim attorney-client privilege on documents that clearly showed criminal intent. But Judge Maria Gonzalez wasn't having it. "This court will not be a party to covering up potential criminal activity," she said at one hearing. "All evidence will be made public. All witnesses will testify." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Sarah Chin testified about the surveillance, about the harassment, about the systematic corruption of the HOA. The deputy county engineer, Thomas Redding, now retired, testified about the water rights agreement, about how it had been legal and binding. 3 other residents testified about their own harassment by Victoria Hayes, and I testified about finding my father's hidden report, about the break-in, about the threats. Victoria Hayes sat through it all in that crimson blazer, her expression never changing, even as the evidence mounted against her, until the end. When the jury foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts, she stood up, and for the first time, that carefully controlled facade cracked. Her hands trembled, those glossy red lips pressed together so hard they went white. She looked at me across the courtroom, and in that moment, I saw what my father must have seen. Not power, not authority, desperation. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Apex Holdings was fined $50 million and banned from operating in Arizona for 20 years. Desert Vista Development dissolved entirely. The HOA was disbanded and reformed with new leadership, new bylaws, and new oversight. And I kept the house, kept the water rights, kept my father's legacy. 6 months after the verdict, I stood in my father's study, looking at the space where he died. I'd finally made it mine. New desk, new shelves. But I'd kept his filing system, his organization, the things that mattered. On the wall, I'd hung a framed copy of the court judgment. Below it, my father's letter. "The property is yours. Don't let them steal it." He'd fought alone, in silence, until the fight killed him. But he'd left me everything I needed to finish what he started. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah Chen standing on my porch, a folder under her arm. Got another case, she said. Family in Tucson. Same situation. HOA corruption. Mysterious property claims. Harassment. She looked at me. Interested? I thought about my father. About the fence line he died protecting. About the principle that some things are worth fighting for. Yeah, I said. I'm interested. Because Victoria Hayes had been right about one thing. Some wars don't end with a single battle. But now, I knew how to fight them. And I knew I wasn't alone. I sat in Gerald's office the next morning, staring at the violation notice Victoria had hand-delivered the night before. Urgent property encroachment violation. Fine. $5,000. Daily penalty. $500 until remedied. Compliance deadline. 72 hours. Gerald read it twice, his jaw tightening. She's escalating because you embarrassed her at the board meeting, he said. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Can she do this? Legally? No. But that doesn't stop her from trying. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Judge Gonzalez's clerk. We need an emergency injunction. While Gerald worked the phones, I sat there thinking about the pattern. The harassment of my father. The fraudulent violations. The systematic pressure campaign. Victoria Hayes wasn't just corrupt. She was methodical, patient. She'd been playing this game for years, and she'd gotten away with it because nobody had fought back hard enough. Until now. Sarah Chen called while I was driving home. I found something, she said. Remember that medical examiner who signed off on your father's death certificate? Dr. Marcus Webb. Yeah, he's been receiving quarterly payments from a consulting firm called Redstone Advisory, $25,000 per year for the past 6 years. Let me guess. Redstone Advisory is owned by Apex Holdings. Close. It's owned by a shell company that's owned by Apex Holdings. But here's the interesting part. Dr. Webb has signed off on 17 natural cause deaths in Maricopa County over the past 5 years. All property owners, all in HOA-controlled communities, all cases where the HOA subsequently acquired the property. My stomach turned cold. 17 people? I'm sending you the list. Sarah's voice was tight. Ryan, this isn't just about your father anymore. This is systematic. They've been killing people and covering it up. Can you prove it? I can prove the financial connection. I can prove the pattern. But proving murder? That requires exhumation orders, toxicology screens, forensic analysis. That requires the FBI. Then we get the FBI involved. I'm already working on it, but you need to understand, once we go down this road, there's no coming back. These people will come after you with everything they have. I looked at the house as I pulled into the driveway. My father's house. The place he died protecting. They already are, I said. The next escalation came at 2 a.m. I was asleep when my phone started ringing. The house alarm. Motion sensor triggered in the backyard. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app I'd installed after the break-in. 3 figures, all wearing dark clothes, moving along the back fence line with surveying equipment. I called 911. By the time the Scottsdale PD arrived 15 minutes later, the figures were gone, but they'd left evidence, survey stakes, planted 20 feet inside my property line, each one marked with a small flag. Pinewood Hills OA, common area boundary. The responding officer took photos and a statement. Looks like a property dispute, he said. You'll need to handle this through civil court. This is criminal trespass, I said. They broke into my yard in the middle of the night, but they didn't break into your house. And they didn't steal anything. His tone suggested he'd already decided this wasn't worth his time. After he left, I called Sarah Chen. She arrived 30 minutes later with her own camera, documenting everything. This is intimidation, she said. They're trying to establish a new property line, create confusion about the boundaries. Then they'll file another quiet title action claiming adverse possession. Over 3 hours? In the middle of the night? Doesn't matter. What matters is they're on camera. She held up her phone, and I know who they are. She'd run facial recognition on the security footage. All three men worked for a company called Southwest Property Services, a firm that specialized in property reclamation for HOAs and real estate developers. The same firm was listed as a contractor for Pinewood Hills HOA in the previous year's budget. "We've got them," Sarah said. Direct connection between the HOA and criminal trespass. Gerald filed an emergency restraining order that morning. Judge Gonzalez granted it by noon. Victoria Hayes, Pinewood Hills HOA, and Southwest Property Services were prohibited from coming within 100 feet of my property. The order was served at 3 p.m. Victoria's response came at 4 p.m. A lawsuit filed in Superior Court. Pinewood Hills Hoe Vice. Ryan Davis claims defamation, harassment, filing false police reports, violation of HOA covenants. They were suing me for $500,000. Gerald read the complaint and laughed. "This is a slap suit," he said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to silence you by burying you in legal costs. Can they do that? They can try, but Arizona has strong anti-slap laws. We'll get this dismissed within 30 days. And when we do, they'll owe you attorney's fees. In the meantime, we keep building our case." Sarah Chen's investigation went deeper. She'd obtained HOA meeting minutes going back 7 years. Every single meeting showed Victoria Hayes voting to increase enforcement, increase fines, increase property compliance initiatives. She'd cross-referenced those votes with property records. In the past 5 years, Pinewood Hills HOA had foreclosed on 12 properties for unpaid HOA dues. All 12 had been sold at auction. All 12 had been purchased by shell companies linked to Apex Holdings. Market value of those 12 properties, $4.2 million. Price, Apex Holdings paid at auction, $800,000. Profit margin, over 400%. Sarah had also tracked down 4 former residents who'd been driven out by HOA harassment. One was a widow in her 70s who'd received 47 violation notices in 6 months. She'd eventually sold her house to Desert Vista Development for 60% of market value just to escape the stress. Another was a disabled veteran who'd been fined $15,000 for excessive vehicle storage because he kept his wheelchair-accessible van in his driveway. When he couldn't pay, the HOA had filed a lien. He'd lost his house. Each story was the same: systematic harassment, impossible standards, crushing fines, forced sales, and always Desert Vista Development or one of its shell companies waiting to buy at below market prices. Gerald compiled everything into a 200-page brief and filed it with the FBI's Phoenix field office. 2 days later, we got a call. Special Agent Jennifer Torres, White Collar Crime Division. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. Torres was 45, sharp-eyed, with the kind of direct manner that said she'd seen every scam imaginable. She read through our evidence for an hour without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. "This is RICO territory," she said. "Racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, possibly murder. We'll need to open a full investigation." "How long?" "Months, maybe a year. These cases take time." I thought about my father, about the 17 other property owners who died under suspicious circumstances. "We don't have a year," I said. Torres's expression softened slightly. "Then we'll move fast. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Davis. The people behind this have resources, political connections. They will fight back." Email from Apex Holdings CEO Marcus Brennan to Victoria Hayes, dated March 2019. Davis property remains priority target. Water rights confirmed at $200 M plus value. Increase pressure immediately. Use any means necessary. Timeline critical. Financial spreadsheet showing projected profits from Pinewood Hills. Acquisitions over 5 years, $45 million. Meeting notes from October 2019, 2 weeks before my father died. Davis refuses all offers. Legal pressure insufficient. Health crisis option approved. Contact Dr. Webb for implementation timeline. Health crisis option. I read those 3 words over and over, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. They killed him, I said quietly. They actually planned it. In a meeting, like it was just another business decision. Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I typed those notes. I scheduled that meeting. I knew what they meant, but I didn't think I couldn't believe they'd actually draw. She broke down, sobbing. Agent Torres put a hand on her shoulder. Miss Porter, you're doing the right thing now. This testimony, these documents, they'll put these people away for life. Sarah was already copying files, organizing them into categories. Financial crimes, conspiracy, evidence of murder. We have everything, she said, looking at Torres. Documentary evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Predicate acts for RICO charges. Wire fraud across state lines. This is airtight. Torres pulled out her phone. I'm calling the U.S. attorney. We need arrest warrants. Now. The FBI raid happened at dawn 3 days later. 50 agents. Multiple locations simultaneously. Apex Holdings' corporate headquarters in Phoenix, a glass tower in the financial district. Victoria Hayes' home in Paradise Valley, a $3 million mansion with views of Camelback Mountain. Desert Vista Development's offices in Scottsdale, though by then it was mostly empty. Sentinel Group's compound in Mesa, where they found servers full of surveillance footage, including footage of my father in the weeks before his death. I watched it on the news from my living room, Marcus and Elena standing guard, as federal agents carried boxes of evidence out of Victoria's mansion. The cameras caught her being let out in handcuffs. She was wearing that crimson blazer even then, perfectly coordinated, hair-styled, makeup flawless, but her face was different. The carefully controlled expression finally completely shattered. For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria Hayes looked like what she really was. Not a powerful HOA president, not a corporate fixer, a criminal. Caught, exposed, finished. The news ran with it for days. Every network, every paper. Phoenix HOA president, arrested in murder for profit scheme, FBI. 17 suspicious deaths, linked to real estate conspiracy. Apex Holdings executives face life in prison. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, victims' families wanting updates, other HOAs wanting to know if they'd been infiltrated. Sarah fielded most of it, but I did one interview with the Arizona Republic. On the record. I told them everything. About my father, about the water rights, about the systematic corruption. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Chen, no relation to Sarah, asked the question everyone wanted answered. How does something like this happen? How does an HOA become a murder-for-profit enterprise? I thought about it for a long moment. It happened slowly, I said. One compromise at a time. One rule bent. One violation ignored. Until the people in charge stop seeing residents as neighbors and start seeing them as obstacles. And when obstacles become worth millions of dollars, some people decide obstacles need to be removed. The article ran the next day, front page, above the fold. By evening, it had been picked up by the Associated Press and distributed nationwide. My father's story wasn't just local news anymore. It was a symbol, a warning, proof that the mundane corruption of HOA overreach could escalate into something deadly. The grand jury convened 6 weeks after the arrests. I testified on the first day, walking through my father's timeline, the investigation, the evidence. The grand jury room was smaller than I'd expected. 23 citizens sitting in tiered rows, listening intently as the prosecutor presented the case. When it was my turn, I held up the photo of my father. This is James Davis, I said, civil engineer, 30 years of public service. He died because he owned property someone else wanted, and the people who killed him thought they could get away with it. The grand jury handed down indictments 3 days later. Conspiracy to commit murder, 17 counts. Wire fraud, 34 counts. Racketeering, extortion. Marcus Brennan and 3 other Apex Holdings executives, same charges, Dr. Falsifying death certificates, 17 counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, 17 counts. Obstruction of justice. 3. Southwest Property Services employees. Criminal trespass. Conspiracy. Intimidation. 2 Sentinel Group contractors. Illegal surveillance, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice. The trial was scheduled for federal court in Phoenix 6 months out. Judge Maria Gonzalez, presiding, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for running a tight courtroom and handing down heavy sentences for white-collar crime. Gerald assembled our legal team immediately. He'd be lead attorney. Sarah Chen would serve as expert witness on the investigation. Amanda Porter as the key whistleblower. 4 other former Pinewood Hills residents as victim witnesses. And I would testify about my father. In the months leading up to trial, I met with other victims' families. There was Margaret Sullivan, whose husband Robert had died in 2018. Heart attack at age 59, healthy, no prior cardiac issues. His property in Pinewood Hills was foreclosed 6 months later for unpaid HOA dues, dues Margaret swore he'd paid before he died. There was David Chen, no relation to Sarah, whose mother Patricia had died in 2017, stroke, at age 67. Her property was sold at auction 3 months later to a shell company that turned out to be owned by Apex Holdings. Each story was the same: sudden death, minimal investigation, property acquired at below market rates. We filed wrongful death suits for all 17 families, class action, seeking $500 million in damages. Apex Holdings insurance carriers immediately tried to settle. Gerald refused. "This isn't about money," he told me. "This is about accountability. We're taking this all the way." The trial began on a Monday morning in October. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the back rows, local news, national networks, even international press, covering the story as an example of American suburban corruption. Victims' families sat in the gallery. I recognized Margaret Sullivan, David Chen, others I'd met during the investigation. FBI agents monitored from the sides, including Agent Torres, who'd been assigned to protect witnesses. And at the defense table sat Victoria Hayes. She'd changed in the months since her arrest. Thinner. Hair still perfect, but somehow duller. She wore different outfits each day, but always that crimson blazer draped over her shoulders like the last piece of armor she had left. Our eyes met once as I entered the courtroom. She looked away first. The prosecution built their case methodically, piece by piece, over 3 weeks. Day 1 to 3, financial evidence. Wire transfers from Apex Holdings to Victoria Hayes' accounts. $750,000 over 7 years, structured to avoid reporting requirements. Spreadsheets showing projected profits from property acquisitions. Day 4 to 5, email evidence. The planning, the targeting, the deliberate campaigns to pressure homeowners. Day 6 to 8, surveillance evidence. Footage from Sentinel Group's servers. Hours of video showing my father being watched, followed, his routines documented. Day 9 to 10, medical evidence. A forensic pathologist explained how digitalis poisoning mimics heart attack symptoms, how it's nearly undetectable without specific toxicology screening, how Dr. Webb would have known exactly what to look for and exactly how to avoid looking for it. Day 11 to 14, witness testimony. Amanda Porter testified for 2 full days, walking through the corporate structure, the planning meetings, the way executives talked about homeowners like they were inventory to be liquidated. By the time she finished, 2 jurors were crying openly. Sarah Chen presented the pattern evidence. Maps showing which properties had been targeted. Timelines showing the harassment campaigns. Financial analyses showing the profit margins, how a $300,000 house purchased at auction for $80,000 could be flipped for $500,000 after adding water rights. It was mathematical, undeniable. Murder as a business model, calculated down to the dollar. Then came the victims' families. Margaret Sullivan described her husband's last days, how he'd been stressed about HOA violations, how he told her someone was following him, how she'd found him collapsed in their study, papers scattered everywhere, just like my father. David Chen talked about his mother's fear, The way she'd changed in her final months. Paranoid, anxious, afraid to leave her house. One by one, 17 families told their stories. 17 lives, 17 deaths. 17 properties worth a combined $280 million in water rights. And through it all, Victoria Hayes sat motionless at the defense table, her expression blank, those glossy red lips pressed into a thin line. On day 15, I testified. The prosecution attorney, a woman named Catherine Morrison, walked me through my father's timeline. His life in Pinewood Hills, the harassment, the final months. "When did you realize your father hadn't died of natural causes?" she asked. "When I found the investigator's report," I said. "When I saw the pattern, when I realized he wasn't paranoid, he was being hunted." Morrison held up the photo of my father I'd brought from home. "Tell the jury about this man." I looked at the photo. At my father standing in his backyard, squinting into the sun, one hand shielding his eyes. "He was a civil engineer," I said. 30 years of public service. He built roads, water systems, infrastructure that still serves this community. He believed in doing things right, following the rules, keeping your word. And he died because he owned property someone else wanted. I looked directly at Victoria Hayes. She didn't look away this time, just stared back with those calculating eyes, even now trying to find an angle, a way out. "He died alone," I continued, "in his study, surrounded by evidence of what they were doing, and they thought they'd gotten away with it. But he left me everything I needed to prove what happened, to expose what they'd done, to make sure they answered for it." Morrison, let that sit for a moment. "What do you want from this trial, Mr. Davis?" "Justice," I said. "For my father, for the 17 people who died, for every family that was destroyed by this scheme. I want them to understand that you can't murder people for profit in this country, that some things are still illegal, that some lines can't be crossed. Even if you wear a nice suit and carry a clipboard and call yourself an HOA president." The courtroom was silent. Morrison nodded. No further questions. Victoria Hayes' attorney, a man named Richard Blackstone, silver-haired, expensive suit, approached for cross-examination. He tried to discredit me, asked about my finances, my career, why I'd left Seattle, whether I had debts, whether I stood to profit from the lawsuit. I answered every question directly and honestly. When he asked if I had any proof my father was murdered, I pulled out Amanda Porter's meeting notes. "Health crisis option approved," I read aloud. "Contact Dr. Webb for implementation timeline." That was written 2 weeks before my father died. What do you think it means? Blackstone had no response. "No further questions," he said quietly. The defense put on their case over the next week, trying to paint Victoria as manipulated. It didn't work. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Victoria Hayes broke when the verdict was read. Her hands trembled, those auburn waves falling forward, the crimson blazer suddenly looking like a costume. She was let out in handcuffs, past the cameras, past the victims' families, past me. Our eyes met. I saw fear, real fear. Judge Gonzalez sentenced her 3 weeks later. 25 years federal prison. No parole. The Apex executives got similar sentences. Dr. Webb got 15 years. The HOA was dissolved. All fraudulently foreclosed properties returned. The water rights confirmed as mine. I kept my father's house. 6 months later, I stood in his study. I'd made it mine. New desk, new shelves. But I kept his filing system, the things that mattered. On the wall, the court judgment, my father's letter, and a photo of him in the backyard. He'd fought alone until it killed him, but he'd left me everything to finish what he started. The doorbell rang. Sarah Chen. Another case. Family in Tucson. HOA corruption. Suspicious death. Interested? I thought about my father, the 17 victims, the principle worth fighting for. "Yeah," I said. "I'm interested. Because some wars don't end with one battle." We helped 12 families over 2 years. 12 HOAs investigated, 8 dissolved, 43 people imprisoned. Arizona passed the Davis Act. HOA transparency. financial audits, criminal penalties. My father's legacy, proof that ordinary people could fight back, that truth still mattered, that justice was still possible. 3 years later, I visited his grave. James Davis, 1957 to 2020. Civil engineer, father, fighter. I set the laminated court order on the stone. You were right about all of it, I said. I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I finished what you started. The wind moved through desert scrub. I thought about Victoria Hayes in prison, about all the others. They'd thought they could kill without consequence. They were wrong. My father had proven that, and I was proving it every day. Some things wouldn't be built over. Some lines would be held. My father's line, and now mine. Not physical fence, but principle, integrity. The refusal to let power rewrite truth. I could live with that, build on that, pass it on.